Let's move on to main topic number 2. And our second main topic today gets submitted to us by Kyle Arking. And Kyle Arking writes, did you read the Variety article stating that Black Widow may move once again and that Soul may move to Disney Plus? If this happens, I am more worried for Soul given that Disney Plus hasn't had the best track record, although I love the one and only Ivan. At this point, I'm no longer trusting release dates until I'm watching the movie. What are your thoughts? All right, man, thanks a lot for sending that in. And yep, you know what? You can count on it. It's like taking it to the bank. A couple days ago, they released a new magazine cover of Black Widow, and I say, you know what? I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it, but I've got a feeling Black Widow is going to keep its release date. I got a feeling Black Widow. I mean, I wouldn't bet money on it. Certainly it may move, but you know what? I'm feeling like Black Widow's going to keep its release date. Fast forward 48 hours. Fast forward 48 hours, and like clockwork, we get the following from the folks at Variety. Disney will likely, remember, it's not official yet, but Disney will likely delay Black Widow, the superhero adventure from Marvel that was slated to open on November 6th, according to multiple individuals with knowledge of the situation. The studio is also exploring various release options for Pixar's existential cartoon, Soul. The animated kids film is still scheduled to release on November 20th, but it's unlikely to move forward with those plans. The studio is even considering releasing on Disney Plus, but, and this is key, a Disney insider disputed claims that Soul was moving to Disney Plus. So yes, there are some rumblings and some whispers and some rumors suggesting that Soul might be moving to Disney Plus, but Variety is quick to point out that they have a Disney insider who is disputing that. So what's happening with Soul? Don't know. But that's not really what I'm focused on right now. What I'm focused more on is this movie that I said like 48 hours ago that I think it's going to keep its release date, Rob. Yeah, I'm thinking it's going to keep, well, maybe not. Now, it's important to point out that they're not saying that it's been confirmed that it's moving its date. They're not, this isn't Disney that's announced it, but it is Variety. And they're saying they got multiple sources in the company that are telling them this thing is going to move. While I am mildly surprised by that, because honestly, my line of thinking, Rob, was that they were going to take advantage of the fact that Tenet volunteered to be the first penguin in the water, and Tenet volunteered to be the movie that would go out there, start raising awareness that theaters are open again, start the process of getting people back into the process of coming to the movies, blah, blah, blah. And that by the beginning of November, in could come movies like Black Widow and take advantage of all that groundwork that Tenet had done, and maybe even taken the credit that Christopher Nolan and Tenet wanted so badly for being the movie to really break it back open again. While I kind of thought that's what was going to happen, it's also not inconceivable that it does move. I mean, look, the reality is even with Tenet being the first penguin back in the water, it's had its struggles. Now, it hasn't just been pandemic struggles. It's been struggles with people grumbling about the sound mix and maybe the movie was too complicated. And we've talked about that ad nauseum. So it's also struggled with that. But in this era of the pandemic where everything is changing day by day, it's impossible to predict anything more than 72 hours out. It's not, I'm not falling out of my chair about this. I still think there's a chance it holds on to that November 6th release date, but it is looking more and more likely that it moves. One of the questions that this does bring up, though, Rob, is that we know how almost obsessively interconnected Kevin Feige likes his properties to be. So the question then becomes, if Black Widow needs to move, will that then, by necessity, trigger a chain reaction of all the MCU stuff and having to move all the other MCU stuff as well? How much of a wrench does, if they have to move Black Widow yet again, throw into the plans of everything else? So, Rob, let's go to you on this. Number one, what do you think about this report? Do you think it's going to move? And if so, how much or how little would this complicate the rest of the MCU release schedule, do you think?
Well, first of all, it becomes academic at some point, because these movies that are expensive, 150 million, 200 million, and 250 million in the case of something like No Time to Die, if their theatrical releases aren't generating what they need to generate. I mean, Tenet at $200 million to pay for marketing, it's got to make 800 million theatrical to break even worldwide. And that $200 million is not nearly enough. And that means basically they took a film, a viable film that probably could have made a lot more money in a non-pandemic situation, and it was sacrificed. It basically, it died. And they have to figure out, how are we going to pay for this movie? Because they've borrowed money, they've been incurring interests on it. So other studios look and they're like, we can't afford to release our $150 million or $200 million films in this situation right now, because we'll go broke. I mean, we literally can't afford it, especially if we have multiple $100 million plus or $200 million movies on deck, which a lot of them do. Warner Brothers, remember, they have Tenet, they have Wonder Woman, and Dune. That is a huge, huge, huge investment by a lot of other people in addition to the studio. And if they're not going to make their money back, they can't just toss aside this investment. It's like burning it up with fire. So I think that's problematic. And I do think, honestly, I think Black Widow is going to move, because that's a potential $1 billion grossing movie for the studio. And are they just going to throw it out and lose that money? I mean, they can't do that. And why would you? If why leave all that money on the table? And it's just too expensive. It's worth too much money. I mean, Disney, look at what happened to Mulan. Not good. So I do think, John, they're going to have to make adjustments. However, the one thing Black Widow has going for it is that it's a prequel. So it does take place after Civil War, before Infinity War, apparently. I don't know if there's a post-credit tag or something, but I'm sure whatever happens in Black Widow, they could chalk it up to, well, it is a prequel, maybe we can fit it anywhere. I just don't know. But because it is, I think that gives it a little bit more leeway. But they might, like you said, do they push Falcon and Winter Soldier? Do they do that?
And then Eternals,
I don't know.
Shang-Chi,
all of that's going to get
Doctor
pushed.
Strange. I mean, and here's the other problem they face, and this is one we don't talk about a lot, but there is awareness fatigue. So let's go back. I'm going to take us back in time a little bit to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's G.I. Joe movie. Now, if you remember, that movie was within 3 months of its release date. It was like within 3 months, maybe even 2 months of its release date.
Right.
They had done a ton of marketing. Of course, you got Dwayne Johnson in it, ton of marketing. Then they bumped it with like 2 months to go. They bumped it almost a year. And then when the movie came out like a year later, there was only a sliver of the enthusiasm for the movie that there had been, because it's like, oh, wait a minute, that didn't come out like a year ago. I would argue that the same sort of thing kind of happened. We often go back to Godzilla, King of the Monsters. You know, they made this big, huge pop splash at San Diego Comic-Con a year before the movie came out with this huge trailer. And then they dropped so many trailers and so many things that by the time the movie came out, I think a lot of people are like, oh, that movie hadn't come out ages ago? Really? It's still coming? And I think that had something to do with its, less than optimal box office return. I think there's also something they're going to have to worry about there's a limit to how many times you can push something and how far off, because I think the more you push it, you're looking at diminishing returns, the more and more you push it. But so you're right. There's this pressure on the one end, and then there's pressure on the other end. And again, I know people get sick of hearing us saying it, but these are unprecedented times. There's no playbook here. It's not like Kevin Feige or the folks at Warner Brothers or anybody can look at, well, how was this handled before? There is none of that. There's no pre-existing example. And it almost looks like a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario for them, right? Like you push it off, there's going to be consequences. You hold firm, there could be consequences. And I don't know. Rob, let me ask you this. You're in charge right now of, let's go outside of the MCU. Let's say of Warner Brothers. you've got Wonder Woman and you got Dune coming. They're coming up. When you look at those possible threats on both sides, what do you do with those movies right now? Are you kind of saying, let's stick with where we are? Or are you saying, listen, there may be some drawbacks, but what are you doing with those movies, which are coming a little bit later than what Black Widow was supposed to do?
Look, for me, if I was running the studio, I can't take the biggest quiver, the biggest arrows in our quiver and sacrifice them at the altar of we must open these films. We're a publicly held company. I have shareholders that are going to say, wait a minute, every MCU movie, it averages out $1 billion. Are you going to throw out Black Widow and think a $400 million gross now is acceptable? I mean, no, we should be making $800 million to $1 billion on that movie. And what you're doing right now is you're the studio executive. If you're putting movies out in the theater right now, you're the studio executive that's losing hundreds of millions of dollars for the studio. That's what you're doing. And until now, we do have, I have to be fair, there are other markets in the country that are in the world that are opening up, and they've been able to do a lot better with COVID than we have. But what we also need to see is we have to see patrons coming back to movie theaters. A lot of movie theaters with social distancing are still working at half capacity. So even the places that it's opening, you're getting diminishing returns no matter what. I just don't think I would ever open a movie in that environment in good conscience. Right. I would, especially these movies, I'd push them. I'd push them. Look, it seems to me that Universal was the smartest. The Fast saga, Fast and Furious 9. Nah, we're just going to push it a year. That's it. Bye-bye. And that might have been not something that anybody wanted to do, but that looks in hindsight like the smart play. Right. Because then they don't have to sit there and announce it, and they don't have to have one article after another and deadline it moves again, blah, 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 and it looks like there's not decisive. It looks like the business is being driven by outside forces. And I know you could say it always is, but it doesn't look like there's decisive leadership at the studios itself, at themselves, because they keep making these decisions like, we'll push it this long. And then, oh, sorry, can't do that. When really, they really know what they should do. They just don't want to do it.
Well, but then at what point though do you have to take into consideration the words of, like, say, Jared Harris in the Morbius trailer, who says, at some point the cure becomes worse than the disease. Like, I mean, I think it goes more complicated too, because, like, if you're Marvel, right? Okay, we put out Black Widow now. We make, let's say we make $400 million less than we would have. We make $400 million less than we would have. That's catastrophic. But if we do that, we are also able to keep everything else where we wanted it to be. We don't have to do any more shifting with all these other things, which could ultimately cost us a lot. And it may just be that, I mean, if we just take Black Widow up now and move it by a year, it could be more costly for us in the long run when you look at whatever possible. But like you said, Rob, maybe there is no impact at all, but maybe there's heavy impact. Does the chain reaction of events ultimately cost us more than what it would have cost us to just keep Black Widow where it was in the first place? I mean, it's a lose-lose, but it might be, which is the least lethal poison? I mean, I don't know. But you're right, dude.
It's a tough call.
It's tough. You're absolutely right about that. So the
economics involved. Sorry, there's too much money to lose. I mean, Tenet's going to be a huge box office failure.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know, but does it cost you more in the long run if you move too many things too many times? I mean, I don't know. It's so complex, and there's so much money that I just think it's a complicated situation that I have no idea what they're going to do about it. Question is for you guys. Let's say you're head of a studio. What do you do? Taking all things into consideration, what do you think the best move is? Are you surprised to hear these reports about Black Widow potentially moving? Are you going to be shocked if it doesn't move? Jump down to the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. All right, guys.